my name is Pat O'Connor. I am the broker owner of the Veritas Real Estate Group, and today I'm going to talk about commercial leasing. Last week I talked about finding commercial investment properties and then how to buy them. And so this week it's you have an investment property now and you want to rent it, or you're a tenant prospective tenant looking for property to rent. So you can either go to a commercial real estate agent, or you can look in LoopNet.com. Now, I usually recommend that people work with a realtor, but in this case, a lot of people join realtor associations just so they can look at listings. Although being a realtor means more than that. But commercial real estate property generally is not listed in the MLS. So in my experience, the majority of commercial real estate professionals are not realtors. So I'm advising you to find a commercial real estate professional or go to LoopNet.com. Read the lease agreement. If you're used to dealing with residential leasing, first-time landlords may all use the standard canned realtor lease agreement for residential properties. With commercial properties, these are drawn up by attorneys or the investor themselves, and each one can be very different from the other. Based on their experience, they're going to customize it to stress the problem areas that they've had in the past. So read each one if you're a prospective tenant and before you sign it. So they may be multi-year. 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year, 15, 20, it depends on properties. And one thing in particular to be aware of, if you are a startup company coming into a space, anticipate whether or not you plan to outgrow your space, because you want to look in your lease if you think you will need more space in the future. If the lease lets you sublet or assign your lease to a third party. If it's not already in the lease, you're going to have to get your landlord's permission to have someone else start making the lease payments. And it may prevent you, if you're in a 5-year or 10-year lease, from growing. All right. So what is subletting? It's when you identify a good prospective tenant. You want to move. You want someone else to come into your space. You identify a good prospective tenant because you are ultimately going to be responsible if that tenant stops making the payments to you. Then you are going to have to make the payments to the landlord out of your own pocket. So it's going to be more paperwork for you, because now you're going to be making monthly payments on the new property, and you still have to make the monthly payments for this property. It's just the tenant pays you first, and then you pay the landlord. So landlord may have some restrictions. Maybe you're a bookkeeper and someone that wants to manufacture fireworks wants to come into your space. The landlord may not like that. So keep the landlord in the loop about what you're doing, and they may want to interview the prospective tenant themselves. Okay, so that's subleasing. You are allowed to change the terms of the lease. You are going to have a new lease that they will sign. Subleasing lease. You're allowed to raise the rent. You're allowed to change duration of the lease, but it cannot extend beyond what your original lease has, right? If you've got 3 years left, you can't make their lease 4 years. All right, you have to stay within your original window. All right, assignment is when you actually, there's no new lease. It's your lease, and you will have this assignment addendum that will be signed by everyone, by you, the tenant, and most likely the landlord, where you are free to move on to your own space. And then that new tenant comes over and takes over your lease with no changes. So no increase in rent, the same terms. So keep the landlord in the loop. Again, the second one, the assignment, probably the landlord will be required to sign it. And some of these, it could be your individual state may not allow one or the other of these. But check with the landlord first if you have plans to grow. Lease types. There's 2 basic lease types, and it reflects whether or not the tenant will directly be charged for building expenses, and how much of those expenses will be the responsibility of the tenants and how much will remain with the landlord. So the first of these is a gross lease. And with a gross lease, you have a flat rate. And then the landlord will pay the expenses out of this gross lease monthly payment. If it's the same property, the gross lease, the rent per square foot is going to be higher than the net lease rent per square foot. The gross lease, no additional fees are tacked on to this. And it may include janitorial services, and it may include utility costs, right? Particularly if there's only 1 meter for a building. All right, then utility costs pretty much have to be thrown in. Because how do you proportion that? I don't. So net lease, there are 3 types, and they reflect how much of a building expenses are picked up by the tenant. So in a listing, if there is a capital N, that is a single net lease. That means they'll pay the stated per square footage price, plus they will pay their share of property taxes for the building based on the square footage of the space that they are renting. So you're not going to see, most likely, okay, in this listing it's a capital N plus, and then the amount of the additional money per month that you'll have to pay. You're going to have to go in and look at the landlord's books or previous statements, or get the information from the listing agent somehow before you sign the lease, because it's not going to be clear in most of these leasing agreements. Okay, so that's single N. Double N, you're going to have the monthly fee. Then you're going to have the property tax plus your share of the insurance. All right. Triple N is the most common of these net leases. So you're paying your flat fee, you're paying your share of the property taxes, and you're paying your share of the building insurance, plus everything else. Very few fees stay the obligation of the landlord. Landlord still has to do their mortgage, but now the tenant will be responsible for picking up damage if the insurance deductible doesn't cover everything, It's gonna be divided, the excess is gonna be divided among the tenants. Common area maintenance, utility bills, any of that stuff, pretty much everything but the mortgage payment. Okay, so again, the drawback is if you are in an area that is prone to environmental damages, some areas have floods, some have tornadoes, some have hurricanes, some have wildfires, some may be earthquake prone. Okay, so keep all of that in mind if you are looking to rent property in a building. All right, so if you like this commercial series, please like us and subscribe. There will be, if you're on the YouTube, there's a subscription thing in the corner. Click it, subscribe. These are good videos. All right, next week I'll talk about some of the terminology and for return on investment, like what is cap rate and some of those measures that people may fling around the words but not really understand what they mean. All right, that's it for this week. I will see you next Sunday. Bye.